Inside Out 2 hit Disney Plus last week. I watched it and immediately went into research and writing mode. I originally had a completely different episode planned for the first week of October, but with it being Mental Health Awareness Month, there is not a more perfect topic for us to start this month with. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode on my channel. My name is Celeste and I am your host and certified life coach. I am so glad to have you here with me today because we are diving into a very important topic, and that is on mental health. Before we get started with today's video, I'd like to remind you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and just double check that bell icon to check that you are getting notified every time I upload a new video. Now, I recently watched Inside Out 2, and don't worry, I have worked incredibly hard to make sure that there aren't any spoilers in this episode, but the movie really got me thinking about emotions and my own experience with anxiety. Since October is the perfect time to be having these conversations, I wanted to share some reflections on mental health and what we can be doing to better take care of ourselves and our mental health. Before we go any further, I just want to make something perfectly clear. I am not a therapist or psychologist, and nothing I say here today should be taken as professional advice or as a substitute for therapy. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my own personal reflections and experiences, but please, if you are struggling with your mental health, please reach out to a registered mental health care professional, such as a psychologist, therapist, or counselor. Therapy has been incredibly helpful in my own journey, and I will be talking about that today. But my role here is simply to create a space for conversation and not to provide therapy or therapeutic strategies. Okay, with all of that said, let's dive in. Mental health is something we all have, the same as physical health, but it often gets overlooked or brushed aside. I think we've all been guilty at some point of saying, "I'm fine," even when we're not. But our mental health deserves attention and care, and sometimes even professional support. Before I start looking at my own personal reflections on the movie, let me give you a quick spoiler-free recap on both the first and second movie in the Inside Out franchise. Inside Out 1 came out in 2015 and follows the story of Riley, a young girl who moves cities. The movie gives us an inner glimpse to her mind as her emotions, joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, try to navigate her new school, her new friends, and this change in her life. In Inside Out 2, released this year, 2024, Riley is now a teenager and is going through puberty, and as a result is experiencing more complex and nuanced emotions. As Riley adapts to these changes in her life, we also see her old emotions from the first movie having to adapt to these changes and the new emotions that have come along with puberty. Even though the movie is a children's movie and is about a young girl going through puberty, there are so many takeaways for adults as well. Whether you are a parent or not, I think there's a lot we can learn and a lot of conversations that can be started from this movie. Personally, anxiety has been part of my life for several years now. I have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, and to be clear, I was diagnosed by a registered licensed psychologist. I'm not sharing this to offer advice on the matter, but merely to demonstrate that it's something that many of us go through. For a long time, I just thought I could manage everything on my own, but that's not how mental health works. There are times when we need help, and that's okay. Therapy was the help I needed, and it's a resource I really encourage anyone who's struggling to consider. Through therapy, I was able to get the tools and resources I needed in order to understand and manage my anxiety better. Now, here is where Inside Out 2 comes in. Watching this movie, I felt very seen. There are moments in this movie with how anxiety is portrayed that felt incredibly validating as someone who lives with anxiety. It's one of the first times I've really seen something in a movie or in a TV series that really captures what anxiety feels like inside my head. It can be really hard to explain to someone what anxiety feels like, and that it is way more than just constant worrying. It is a constant loop of thoughts and feelings and emotions that can be really hard to untangle. But in this movie, there were moments where I was really able to say, yes, this captures what is going on inside of my mind closer than anything else I've ever seen when my anxiety is taking hold. I think for a very long time, Hollywood and movies and series have actually done a little bit more harm than good in their portrayal of mental health. And I understand that we're in this really weird space right now where the stigma is being broken on mental health and more people are speaking about it. But at the same time, accurate portrayal of mental health becomes important. One example that jumps to mind is OCD. There is such a misconception around what OCD is, and I think that's because people see in movies and series what it's being portrayed as, but that's really not accurate. If you were to go look in the DSM-5 and look at the diagnostic criteria, what we're seeing in movies and series as OCD and in general media is not actually what OCD is. Now, just to be clear, these are just my personal opinions and reflections on anxiety and the portrayal of mental health in movies and media. My opinions are definitely not a substitute for explaining anxiety from a clinical perspective, but if you have ever struggled to put your anxiety into words or explain it to someone else, Inside Out 2 may be a pretty good way to explain it or show it to someone else. If you do feel like you are struggling with anxiety, depression, or any other mental health related matter, the best step for you to take is to seek guidance from a registered or licensed mental health care practitioner. They will be able to give you the guidance, support, and information you need. There is a YouTube channel called Cinema Therapy, and they have done a deep dive into Inside Out 2. In this episode, they have a licensed therapist, Jonathan Decker, who talks about the portrayal of anxiety in the movie. I'm trying my best to avoid any spoilers here, but Jonathan Decker tries his best to explain that anxiety is not the villain in this movie. This seems to be a little bit of a misconception that people have walked away with from the movie, but the movie does actually portray very well that anxiety isn't the villain. And when it acts within its bounds, anxiety actually serves a purpose in our lives. Anxiety is an important emotion and it exists to protect us, but when it gets out of hand, that's when it gets a bit overwhelming. Jonathan Decker did an absolutely superb deep dive as a therapist into this movie, and if you have seen it and you're okay with spoilers, I will link the video in the description down below, and I highly recommend you go and give it a watch. Greater Good Science Center on YouTube also has an episode up talking about Inside Out 2. In the episode, they have Dr. Lisa Demure and some of the other experts and psychologists who consulted and worked on the film talking about the emotions and the actual science and psychology behind the movie. I risk including some spoilers if I talk any more about the episode, but if you have watched the movie, please also do give it a watch. They give some really good explanations on how anxiety works and the role that anxiety plays in adolescence. One other thing I really enjoyed about Inside Out 2, and that came up again and again in my research for this episode, was how well it captures the complexity of our emotions. We often feel more than one thing at the same time, and that is completely normal. You might feel happy and sad at the same time, or excited and nervous all in one go. For me, living with anxiety, this is something I experience fairly often, where I have more than one emotion being experienced at a time. Again, I want to be perfectly clear, I am not offering therapy or therapeutic advice. If you are struggling with your mental health, anxiety, or depression, a professional therapist or psychologist can give you the help and support you need. So if you have been thinking about seeking help and you're not sure where to start, here's what I can share from my own experience. Ensure that you find yourself a registered or licensed psychologist or therapist. There are many people out there who misrepresent their services and what they are licensed or registered to offer. Also, don't be afraid to try different therapists. It's perfectly okay if you need to have 1 or 2 sessions with different therapists to find someone that is a good fit to work with you. And remember, reaching out for help is not a sign of weakness. In fact, it's the complete opposite. It's a sign that you have the strength to take care of yourself and your mental health. And that is all for today's episode. I hope that this conversation has given you some insights, or at the very least, made you feel more comfortable to talk about your own mental health and to seek help when you need it. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to hit the subscribe button, like this video, and ring the notification icon so that you never miss one of my uploads. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to make some time and watch Inside Out 2. I'll see you all next week.